Welcome to Forgotten Worlds for Sleep, where the past does not fade, it only dreams. Here, history drifts between candlelight and silence, and ancient voices return to whisper their stories once more. Tonight, we follow a legend that burns brighter than time itself. The tale of Achilles, born of sea and storm, and of Troy, the city destined to fall beneath the weight of fate. You'll walk the moonlit shores beside heroes and gods. Hear the clash of bronze, the breath of sorrow, and the quiet between two heartbeats where history sleeps. But this is not a tale of conquest. It is a story of love, loss, and the gentle truth that even glory must rest. Let your breath slow, let the world soften, and drift into the calm between dreams and memory. This is Forgotten Worlds for Sleep, where forgotten empires rise again, only to lull you into peaceful slumber. The night draped itself over the plain of Troy like a vast, dark shroud. Far from the city's high walls, the Argive camp lay restless under the indifferent stars. Fires flickered low, their embers whispering to the sea breeze that carried the faint smell of salt, blood, and despair. For 10 long years, they had fought beneath these same skies. Heroes, kings, and soldiers whose names the poets once sang with pride. Yet now, even the bravest among them looked toward the silent ramparts of Troy and felt only weariness. The walls still stood. The war had not moved an inch. Around the command tent, voices murmured low, angry, and uncertain. Men who had crossed half the world to claim glory found themselves cursing the gods for their silence. Agamemnon, the High King, brooded over maps smeared with wax and wine. Odysseus leaned in shadows, his eyes sharp as the blade at his side. But even cunning minds could find no easy path through stone, fate, and pride. Beyond the tents, among the Myrmidons, the mightiest of them all sat apart. Achilles, the son of Thetis and Peleus, the one whom no blade could strike down. But even his invincible flesh was bound by anger, not war. His tent glowed faintly in the distance, its walls hiding the man whose absence had turned the tide of battle. The camp felt his silence like a wound that would not close. Through the murmurs and fading embers, 2 figures rose from the darkness: Odysseus, the quiet strategist, and Diomedes, son of Tydeus, whose spear had never missed its mark. Both were weary of watching heroes die for nothing. Both had seen the despair in the eyes of men who no longer believed the dawn would bring anything but more suffering. And so they made a decision. "We have sought glory by the sun," Odysseus said, his voice steady and low. "But perhaps night will grant what daylight denies." Diomedes studied the darkness beyond the wall of torches, the land between the camps where shadows moved like breath. He understood. If they could not break Troy's gates, perhaps they could break its spirit. The plan was dangerous, almost unthinkable: to slip into the enemy's camp, unseen, unheard, and strike at the very heart of Hector's allies. They would not march as soldiers, but as wraiths. If fortune favored them, they would return with more than intelligence. They would return with hope. The 2 men clasped hands in silence, sealing their pact not with words, but with the calm certainty of those who no longer fear death. Their preparations were quiet, almost ritual, gone with the gleaming bronze corselets and high-crested helmets that proclaimed their rank. Instead, they wrapped themselves in dark cloaks, the color of moonless sky. They bound their feet in soft leather, carried daggers instead of spears. Warriors became shadows. Heroes became whispers. Before they departed, Odysseus took from his satchel a small relic, a leather cap reinforced with curved boar's tusks. He placed it upon his head and smiled faintly. "A gift from my grandfather," he murmured, "the master of thieves." Diomedes nodded. "Then let his blood guide our feet tonight." They slipped from the camp like wolves leaving a den, unseen by the guards whose eyes drooped with exhaustion. Behind them, men dreamt uneasy dreams, visions of fire and broken ships, of gods who turned their faces away. Ahead lay the dark plain between 2 worlds, the sleeping Argives, and the watchful Trojans. In that silence, every step became a prayer, every breath a gamble with fate. Above, the stars burned coldly, indifferent to mortal struggle. They had watched 1,000 wars rise and fade. They would watch 1,000 more. And yet, beneath their eternal gaze, two men moved with purpose born not of hatred, but of desperate hope. Somewhere, deep in their hearts, they still believed that courage and cunning could achieve what armies could not. The night accepted them, swallowed them whole. Behind them, the last campfires flickered and died, their smoke twisting into the sky like the ghosts of forgotten heroes. By dawn, the world would change again, but for now, there was only silence, the whisper of sand beneath soft soles, and the promise of something terrible waiting in the dark. The moon hung low over the plain, pale and watchful, a silent witness to secrets men dared not speak beneath the sun. Odysseus and Diomedes moved quietly among the sleeping tents, their cloaks whispering against the earth. The scent of salt and smoke drifted on the wind, and somewhere far away, an owl called, a lonely sound in a world ruled by war. They stopped near the edge of the camp, where the torches faded into darkness. Before them stretched the long emptiness that separated life from death, no man's land, where neither army claimed dominion, and every step could awaken doom. For a long time, neither man spoke. Then Diomedes broke the silence. "If the gods watch us tonight," he murmured, "I hope they do so with closed eyes, for what we attempt is closer to thievery than valor." Odysseus smiled faintly beneath his hood. "Perhaps, but war itself is a thief, Diomedes. It steals youth, hope, and sleep. We only steal what it has not yet taken." He knelt in the dust, tracing a circle upon the ground with the point of his dagger. Inside it, he drew 3 symbols, a sword, a flame, and a star. "The sword for strength," he said softly. "The flame for courage. The star for cunning. 3 gifts we ask of the gods who no longer listen." Diomedes watched, then placed his hand over the circle. His palm was scarred. The lines of his life burned deep by battles too many to name. "I swear," he whispered, "by my blood and by my spear, to see this task done, to strike where armies cannot, and to return if fate allows." Odysseus pressed his own hand beside his companion's. "I swear to guide our steps through the dark, to weave paths unseen and strike where hearts are soft. Together, we shall be the unseen doom of Troy." The 2 hands remained joined over the dust. The night breeze stirred the ashes of forgotten fires, scattering their oath into the wind, a promise carried to gods who might still be listening, or to fates who simply smiled in silence. They rose. Their silhouettes were tall and lean against the horizon, ghost-like in the thin light. No armor clanked, no words followed, only the quiet rhythm of their breath and the soft rustle of cloaks. Odysseus adjusted the boar tusk cap upon his head. It gleamed faintly, catching a trace of moonlight. "Do you think," he asked, almost to himself, "that we shall return?" Diomedes gave a low chuckle. "If we do, the poets will call us mad, and if we don't, they'll call us brave. Either way, we shall be remembered." Beyond them, the plain shimmered with mist. From Troy's distant walls came the muffled sound of a watchman's horn. The enemy did not know it yet, but 2 shadows were already crossing the line that divided glory from oblivion. Each step carried them deeper into danger, deeper into destiny. The earth beneath their feet still held the heat of the day's battle, as though the land itself had absorbed the memory of blood. They passed the broken bodies of the fallen, lying half buried in the dust. Men whose names were already forgotten, whose armor had been stripped, and whose eyes still stared at nothing. Odysseus paused a moment beside one of them and murmured a quiet prayer, not to the gods, but to the dead. "Forgive us," he whispered. "We walk where you fell. We take what you lost." Then, together, they moved on. Somewhere in the distance, the faintest hint of dawn waited beyond the eastern rim of the world. But the 2 men walked away from it, into the thicker shadows that clung to Troy's side of the plain. They no longer looked like warriors. They looked like memories. As they vanished into the dark, the sea sighed softly against the shore, and the stars seemed to fade just slightly, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. When the last sound of their footsteps was gone, only silence remained. And yet, within that silence, something ancient stirred. The kind of quiet before storms, before revelations, before the fall of kings. For in the dark beyond the torches, two men had bound their fates not to glory, but to the unseen hand of destiny. And destiny had begun to move. Far across the plain, beyond the flicker of Argive fires, another light burned. Small, fragile, and lonely. A single torch within the camp of Troy's allies. There, among the tents of the Thracians, a young man sat awake while his companions slept. His name was Dolan, son of humble Ides, swift of foot but untested in battle. He was not born a hero. His hands had known the reins of a chariot, not the grip of a spear. Yet tonight, ambition whispered louder than wisdom. He had heard King Hector's promise. Whoever slips into the Argive camp and brings me their secrets shall win Achilles' immortal horses. The words had taken root in his heart like fire in dry grass. Those horses, white as winter clouds, swift as divine wind, were said to have been born of gods. To possess them was to hold glory itself. And Dolan, who had spent his life in the shadows of greater men, longed for a name that would be sung. He rose from his cot and fastened the wolf pelt cloak around his shoulders. The gray fur blended with the darkness, and the scent of wildness clung to him. He took a curved dagger from beside his bed and ran a finger along its edge. It was sharp enough to cut thought from hesitation. Outside, the camp was quiet. Warriors lay sprawled around dying fires, their armor catching faint glints of starlight. The smell of wine and sweat hung heavy in the air. Dolan paused and looked toward Troy. The city walls loomed far away, their towers faint against the horizon. He thought of his mother, who still believed her son would return one day bearing honor. He thought of his father, who had once warned him that fame is a shadow that devours its owner. And yet, what was life without it? He whispered to the darkness, "Let them call me brave when dawn comes." Then he slipped between the tents and vanished into the sea of night. The plain stretched before him, empty, endless, and cold. A low mist clung to the ground, turning every stone into a ghost. The faint hum of insects filled the air, broken only by the distant sigh of waves against the shore. He moved quickly, light on his feet, the wolf's pelt flowing behind him like smoke. For a time, he felt invincible. Each heartbeat was a drum of courage, each breath a promise of glory. He imagined the moment of his return, Hector clasping his shoulders, the people of Troy cheering, the poets already shaping his name into song. He saw himself driving the divine horses through the city streets, gold harnesses flashing like lightning. He saw himself immortal. But the plain does not care for dreams. In the spaces between heartbeat and breath, danger waited, silent, patient, ancient. For Dolan was not the only hunter abroad that night. Elsewhere in the darkness, Odysseus lifted a hand. He had caught movement, faint but unnatural. A flicker where no fire burned, a shape where shadows should have been still. Beside him, Diomedes froze. Two wolves had scented prey. "Someone walks the plain," whispered Odysseus. Alone, they sank to the earth and waited, eyes adjusting to the dim. Slowly, the figure emerged, small, cloaked, cautious. Not a warrior by stance or stride. A messenger, perhaps. A fool, more likely. But fools can carry fortune. They moved as one, soundless, disciplined, each step measured. When Dolan finally sensed them, it was too late. A shadow passed across the moon. Hands seized him. The dagger fell from his grasp with a dull thud. He struggled, breath quick and wild, but their grip was iron. A voice like cold bronze spoke in his ear. "Silence, or die before you can speak." In the darkness between camps, three fates met. A young man driven by dreams, and two soldiers driven by necessity. The gods, who so rarely sleep, leaned closer to watch. The night held its breath. In the hollow between the two camps, the air was thick with silence, the kind of silence that lives just before violence. The stars looked down like watchful eyes, cold and distant, while three men stood in the dust between worlds. Dolan trembled in their grasp. His heart hammered like a trapped bird's. He could not see their faces beneath their hoods, only the gleam of eyes that reflected starlight and purpose. He tried to speak, but a hand closed around his throat, firm, not cruel, only certain. Odysseus leaned close, his voice low and level. "Who are you, and why do you walk the night alone?" I come with no sword," Dolan gasped, his voice small against the vast dark. "A messenger, a loyal man of Troy." Diomedes' tone was quiet thunder. "No messenger crosses the plain without command. Speak truly, or you will join the dead who already feed the earth." The youth's courage cracked like thin ice. Fear loosened his tongue faster than mercy ever could. "I serve King Hector," he stammered. "He promised reward, the horses of Achilles, to whoever brings word of your plans. I meant no harm. I only sought honor." Odysseus exchanged a glance with his companion. The gods, it seemed, had placed a key into their hands, one that unlocked more than they had dared to hope. He knelt before Dolan, his shadow long and still. "You wish for honor," he murmured, "and you shall have it. Speak, and your name will live, if only for a moment longer." What followed came in fragments, a torrent of desperate confession. The boy spoke of Hector's plans for dawn, where the lines would form, which captains would lead, how the Thracians had arrived with their king, Rhesus of the white horses. He spoke of the prophecy whispered in campfires and temples alike, that if Rhesus's steeds drank from the river Xanthus and grazed upon Troy's plain, the city would never fall. The two Argives listened in stillness, their minds already weaving strategy from revelation. Here was the chance that 10 years of battle had failed to grant. Here was the turning of fate itself, hidden in the words of a trembling youth. When Dolan had finished, he looked between them with pleading eyes. "You have what you came for. Let me go. My father is rich. He will pay in gold and bronze beyond counting." For a long time, no one answered. The only sound was the whisper of wind moving through the grass, stirring the fallen helmets of the forgotten. Finally, Diomedes spoke. "There is no ransom great enough to buy silence." The words were not cruel. They were weary, almost gentle, like a prayer for the inevitable. Dolan's breath caught. He understood. He tried to run, but the night itself seemed to close around him. A flash of bronze, a soft exhale, and then stillness. The wolf pelt cloak that had made him invisible became his shroud. Odysseus looked down at the body, his face unreadable. "War teaches us to kill wisdom before pity," he said quietly, "and yet I pity him still." Diomedes wiped his blade upon the earth. He died chasing glory. Few have a nobler reason. They covered the youth with stones, not from compassion alone, but to hide the act from the eyes of dawn. When they rose, the stars had shifted. The night felt older. Ahead, faint torches flickered from the Thracian camp, careless, unwary, unaware of the doom approaching them on silent feet. The air itself seemed to tighten with anticipation. Odysseus adjusted his cloak. "The prophecy says those horses must never drink Trojan water," he whispered. "Then tonight, we make certain of it." Side by side, the two shadows moved once more into the dark, death in human shape, guided by necessity, followed by fate. Behind them, Dolan's blood seeped into the thirsty soil, vanishing among the countless stains of nameless wars. The wind rose softly over the plain, carrying with it the faintest sound, not quite a cry, not quite a sigh, as if the earth itself mourned the young man who had wanted to be a hero. The wind had stilled. Even the insects had fallen silent, as though the earth itself refused to make a sound that might betray what was coming. Far ahead, the Thracian camp shimmered faintly under the moon. A scatter of tents, a few guttering fires, and the drowsy murmur of men who believed themselves safe. Odysseus and Diomedes crouched among the low shrubs that bordered the encampment. Between them stretched a thin ribbon of trampled grass, bright with dew. Beyond it slept the king they sought, Rhesus, proud son of Thrace, newly come to Troy with his white horses and his shining armor of gold. Odysseus watched the camp for a long time, measuring the rhythm of its sleep. A guard shifted near the horses, yawned, and nodded once more into drowsiness. From another tent came the slow breathing of soldiers lost in wine-heavy dreams. Everything in the scene spoke of weariness and confidence, the fatal twins of defeat. The two intruders shared a glance. No words were needed. They slipped across the open ground like mist. Soft-soled boots touched earth without sound. Cloaks brushed the air like the wings of moths. The horses lifted their heads as the shadows passed, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at the scent of strangers. Odysseus murmured to them in an old tongue, low, rhythmic, soothing. The beasts, sensing power rather than threat, settled again with quiet snorts. Inside the first tent, a warrior stirred. Diomedes' hand moved like lightning, and the movement ended before a sound could form. The sleeper's breath simply stopped, his dream folding into endless night. Another man turned over, muttering. Odysseus' dagger found a hollow beneath his ribs. The camp, vast and heavy with slumber, never noticed. They moved from tent to tent, two shadows performing a grim liturgy. Every stroke was deliberate, every death swift. No cruelty, no hesitation, only the cold efficiency of necessity. 12 men died before their dreams had time to change. At last they reached the central pavilion, where King Rhesus lay upon a couch of crimson hides. Gold gleamed faintly at his throat, beside him. His armor glowed with its own inner light. Even in sleep, the king's face was proud, the look of one who trusted destiny more than vigilance. Odysseus paused at the threshold. For an instant, pity brushed him, light as a moth's wing. Here was a man who had come seeking glory, not doom. But war makes all men equal before silence. He gave a small nod. Diomedes stepped forward, and the deed was done. The blade found the heart found stillness. The prophecy that had promised Troy safety dissolved into blood and moonlight. The two Argives worked quickly. Odysseus gathered the gleaming armor, the proof of their triumph, while Diomedes loosed the snow-white horses and led them into the open plain. They moved with uncanny grace, as if they knew that the hands upon their reins carried both fate and freedom. Behind them, the camp began to stir. A single soldier half woke, sensing the shift in the night. He raised his head, blinking toward the moonlit emptiness where shadows had passed. Then a hand covered his mouth, and darkness reclaimed him. By the time the first true light of dawn touched the edges of the sea, the deed was finished. Smoke rose lazily from the few fires that remained. The rest of the camp lay hushed forever. Two figures rode away across the plain, leading the divine horses, whose manes caught the sunrise like flowing silver. No trumpet sounded, no victory cry, only the whisper of hooves through grass, the rhythm of men who knew how fragile triumph can be. Behind them, blood soaked into the dust, warm, fleeting, forgotten. Ahead, the Argive ships waited in anxious silence, their crews still dreaming of defeat. When the returning shadows reached the first line of sentries, the guards almost cried out in alarm. Then they saw what followed, the horses, white as winter, glowing against the gray of dawn. The cry that broke from the Argive camp was not of fear, but of wonder. Through the mists of exhaustion and despair, hope began to move again, slowly at first, like a tide returning to a dead shore. Men rose from their beds to see the prize, to touch the proof that fortune still remembered them. And as Odysseus handed the golden armor to his king, he whispered only 4 words. "It is done, my lord." No one spoke of the boy who had led them to this moment, or of the silent men who would never wake again. War does not remember its instruments. It remembers only its results. As the sun climbed higher, the horses whinnied softly, their breath turning to mist in the morning chill. In that sound was both beauty and sorrow, the reminder that victory, like dawn, always comes painted in blood. Dawn came quietly over the plains of Troy. The first light spilled across the sleeping camps, turning the sea into molten gold. Mist rose from the ground, veiling the earth in soft gray, as though the gods wished to hide the evidence of what had been done beneath its silver shroud. Among the Argive tents, men stirred. The long night had ended, and the familiar sounds of war returned. The clang of bronze, the low murmur of soldiers rising from uneasy sleep. But today, something was different. As the mist began to thin, they saw them. The white horses of King Rhesus stood at the heart of the camp, radiant beneath the morning sun. Their coats shimmered like light upon still water. Their eyes, dark and deep, seemed to hold the memory of another world. Beside them stood Odysseus and Diomedes, silent and unsmiling, their cloaks heavy with dew, their faces unreadable. When word spread of what they had done, the camp awoke not with cheers, but with awe. Men gathered, whispering as though in the presence of gods. Even Agamemnon, who had forgotten the meaning of humility, bowed his head when he saw the steeds. They were proof of something larger than courage, proof that the fates still turned, that the gods had not abandoned them completely. The horses were victory made flesh, yet beneath that rising hope, another silence lingered, the silence of those who had not returned, the shadow of the price paid in darkness. Every triumph hides its grave. Odysseus stood apart, watching the horses as their breath rose in thin clouds. He said nothing. He did not speak of the Thracian king or the youth in the wolf-pelt cloak. He had learned that victory, once spoken aloud, loses its purity. Diomedes, still streaked with dust and blood, met his companion's eyes. "There will be songs of this," he said quietly, "but they will forget the faces." Odysseus nodded. "Let them. We did not do this for songs." From the edge of the sea, Achilles watched it all. The sudden stir of triumph, the laughter of soldiers rediscovering hope, the gleam of white horses that once belonged to a dead man. He did not smile. The breeze tugged at his hair, carrying the salt of the ocean and the faint, distant scent of blood. To him, the horses were not a gift from the gods, but a reminder that even in victory, men are only shadows moving across a greater design. He turned and walked away from the shore. Behind him, the camp roared with new life. Before him, his tent waited, still and silent, holding the weight of his absence. In the city beyond the plain, the people of Troy woke to strange news. Messengers spoke of a massacre, of allies slain in their sleep, of a prophecy broken before it could bloom. And when Hector heard, his jaw tightened, his gaze turning toward the horizon, where the Argive ships gleamed like a wound upon the sea. "Then the gods have taken sides," he said. But in his heart, he knew, the gods take no sides. They only watch, and wait, and whisper through the wind. That day, both camps prepared for battle once more. The Argives, filled with sudden faith, lifted their shields and believed that the tide had turned. The Trojans, struck by the loss of their new ally, steeled their hearts with vengeance. Two nations moved toward each other again, drawn by an invisible thread that could only end in ruin. As the sun climbed higher, the scent of ash and blood drifted together on the wind, and the white horses, perfect, serene, untainted by the madness of men, lifted their heads toward the sound of distant drums. Some said they trembled, some said they smiled, but all agreed that when the light struck them, for a brief and blinding moment, they looked not like beasts of flesh and bone, but like omens, omens of glory, of death, and of all that men would lose before the war was done. The days that followed were heavy with waiting. Though dawn came each morning and smoke rose from the Argive fires, the heart of the army beat slower, muted by the absence of one man. Achilles did not fight. His tent stood like a tomb at the edge of the sea, its doorway half open to the wind. Inside, the armor forged by gods lay untouched, its bronze catching the pale light. like something sleeping. Around it hung silence, deeper than any prayer. Without him, the war turned uncertain. The Argives fought with fury, but not with faith. They pushed and bled and shouted his name across the field, as if sound alone could summon him back to purpose. Yet no answer came from the shore. Hector, seeing this, pressed the advantage. He led his men like fire through dry reeds, burning everything he touched. Each night, the Trojans feasted within sight of the enemy ships, their torches shining like constellations on the plain. And each night, the Argives dreamed of their missing champion. Among them, Odysseus watched in silence. He knew that wars were lost not by spears, but by hearts breaking too slowly to notice. He visited the tents of kings, spoke words meant to sound like hope, and listened as pride drowned reason. The sons of Atreus, Agamemnon and Menelaus, argued over blame, while the army's strength bled into the sand. One evening, a storm gathered over the sea. Rain swept the camp clean of dust and lies. Odysseus stood outside Achilles' tent, listening to the thunder roll like distant drums. When the flap opened, the hero's eyes glimmered in the candlelight, cold, unreadable, as though he had already begun to leave the world of men. "You come to ask again," Achilles said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of stone. "I come to remind you," Odysseus answered, "that without you, the song ends before it begins." Achilles smiled, a small, broken thing. The song never ends. It only changes who it praises. Outside, lightning split the horizon. For a heartbeat, both men were lit in silver, one bound by duty, the other by destiny. When the storm passed, the war resumed its rhythm. Hector's chariot wheels carved furrows through the mud, his bronze gleaming beneath gray skies. The Trojans drove the Argives back step by step until the black hulls of the ships loomed behind them. The smell of salt and smoke mingled, the scent of defeat. Patroclus watched from the shore. He could bear it no longer. Each scream, each dying cry from the field tore through him, like flame through dry cloth. In every fallen man, he saw Achilles' absence made visible. That night, he entered his friend's tent. The sea whispered outside, and the candle between them guttered in the wind. "Let me go," Patroclus said. "Let me wear your armor. If they believe Achilles fights, their courage will return." Achilles looked up slowly. For a moment, the mask of indifference slipped, and behind it shone grief, ancient, endless. "Do you understand what you ask?" "Yes," Patroclus whispered, "and I understand what you've forgotten. They need hope, not gods." Silence stretched between them like a drawn bow. At last Achilles rose, lifted the armor from its resting place, and set it before his friend. "Then take it," he said. "But when you have driven them from the ships, come back. Do not chase glory. It kills faster than any spear." Patroclus nodded, though his heart already burned too brightly to hear. Outside, dawn bled into the sea. When he stepped from the tent, the armor caught the first light, and the soldiers who saw him gasped. They believed the godlike Achilles had returned. Their cries rose into the morning air, shaking the walls of Troy itself. And far away on Mount Olympus, the gods turned their eyes toward the plain once more, for they knew that when men wear another's glory, fate sharpens its blade. The war without the hero was ending, but the tragedy with him was about to begin. The dawn came pale and trembling, spilling its light across the restless sea. The Argive camp stirred with whispers, then with wonder, for out of the mist rose a figure they thought lost. Bronze caught the sun. The horsehair crest swayed like a flame in the wind. "Achilles," they murmured, awe and hope mingling in their throats. But it was not Achilles. It was Patroclus, his friend, cloaked in divine armor, carrying the illusion of a god and the heart of a man who loved too fiercely to stand still. The Myrmidons gathered around him like wolves recognizing their leader's scent. Their spears clattered against their shields in rhythm, the sound shaking the morning air. From tent to tent, word spread. The son of Peleus fights again. Fear rippled through the Trojan ranks. Men who had faced countless deaths found their courage faltering. Patroclus mounted the chariot. The divine horses snorted, their breath white against the dawn. The reins felt heavy in his hands, not from their weight, but from the history they carried. He looked once toward the sea, where Achilles sat in silence, a shadow carved from sorrow, and then forward, toward the smoke and the streams. The chariot leapt forward. The first clash came swift as a breaking wave. The Trojans fell back, unprepared for the storm that tore through their lines. Patroclus fought like one possessed, bronze flashing, spear singing. Each blow seemed guided by something greater than skill, by love, by desperation, by the need to prove that hope had not yet died. He cut through the chaos, his borrowed armor gleaming with false divinity. And for a time it worked. The Trojans broke before him, ships saved from flame. The Argives rallied, shouting Achilles' name with every charge. Even the gods paused their eternal watch to mark the courage of a mortal playing at godhood. But the heat of triumph is a dangerous fire. The more the enemy fled, the farther Patroclus chased. The warnings Achilles had given. Drive them from the ships, then return. Faded beneath the roar of victory. He saw the Trojans scatter toward their walls, and in their retreat, he saw glory's beckoning hand. His chariot wheels tore over the blood-soaked earth. He felt no fatigue, no fear, only the rising hum of destiny in his veins. Now, he shouted. Now he ended. He was no longer the gentle-hearted companion who soothed Achilles' wrath or tended the wounded by firelight. He was something else, something brighter, more terrible. He was a man who believed he could change fate by sheer will. 3 times he stormed the gates of Troy. 3 times Apollo struck him back, unseen but unyielding. Each time, Patroclus rose again, dazed but undeterred, like a wave returning to the shore that rejects it. The god's voice thundered on the wind. No further, mortal. This city is not yours to take. But in his triumph, he no longer heard. Then came Hector, golden helm gleaming, eyes dark with purpose. He saw the armor and believed his hour of reckoning had come, believed Achilles himself had returned to claim vengeance. Their meeting was brief, brutal, and fated. Patroclus, still radiant in the borrowed bronze, cast his spear. It found its mark, and Hector staggered. But then the far shooter struck again. Apollo's invisible hand swept across the plain, blinding the false god for an instant, knocking the spear from his grasp. A Trojan blade followed, piercing between shoulder and chest. The light in the armor dimmed. Patroclus fell to his knees, the ground rising to meet him like an old friend. Blood spread through the dust, dark and quiet. The world, for a heartbeat, stilled. Hector stepped forward, his breathing ragged. He pulled the helmet from the fallen warrior's head and froze. This was no god, no son of Peleus, only a man, gentle and brave, who had worn another's glory too long. Patroclus' voice came soft, trembling but clear. You boast, Hector, but death walks behind you. Achilles will come, and when he does, even the gods will weep. Then silence. The wind carried the words across the plain to where Achilles sat by the sea, and though no messenger had yet arrived, the hero rose, as if some part of his soul had been torn away. The armor had fallen, the illusion was broken, and in its place, wrath was reborn. Night fell early that day. The horizon dimmed beneath clouds the color of ashes, and even the sea seemed to hold its breath. From the Argive camp came no songs, no clatter of feasting bowls, only silence, a silence so deep it felt alive, listening, waiting for grief to speak. By the shore, Achilles sat alone. The waves moved around him in slow, patient rhythm, washing over his feet, retreating, returning again. He had felt something break inside him long before the messenger came, a chill that no fire could drive out, a stillness too heavy to name. Then came the sound of footsteps, hesitant and hollow. Automedon, driver of the immortal horses, stood before him, dust clinging to his face, his voice caught between duty and despair. The words he spoke were not needed. Achilles already knew, but when they came, they struck like lightning all the same. Patroclus has fallen. For a long while, there was no answer, only the whisper of the tide and the faint hiss of wind against bronze. Then Achilles rose, not quickly, but as something vast and ancient might rise from deep water. His eyes, once bright as polished gold, were now colorless, reflecting nothing but loss. He walked toward the sea. Kneeling, he let the waves break against him, salt mingling with tears he did not remember allowing. When he spoke, it was to the empty air, to the gods who had long since turned away. Zeus, what joy remains to me now? My heart is ash, my hands are cursed. He went in my armor, and for my pride he has died. If I had only gone myself. The words trailed away, carried off by the wind. He struck the sand with his fists, again and again, until blood mixed with seawater. The world seemed to fold in around him, and somewhere beneath the waves, his mother heard. Thetis rose from the depths like dawn breaking beneath the sea. Her veil shimmered with pearls, her face radiant and sorrowful. She found her son lying in the surf, half drowned by grief. The sight broke her heart anew. "My child," she said softly, her voice like water lapping against a stone. "Even now, the gods have not spared you from sorrow. What are riches, what is glory, when love lies cold beside the ships?" Achilles looked up, eyes rimmed with salt and madness. "He is gone, mother, the one I loved above all others, and Hector still lives." Thetis touched his hair as she had when he was small, her immortal hand trembling. "If you go to battle, you will not return," she whispered. "Your life will end soon after his." "I know," Achilles replied, "but if I do not go, I am already dead." For the first time, Thetis wept, not with the tears of the sea, but with something closer to mortal grief. She knew her son's fate as clearly as she knew the tides, and yet no power in heaven or earth could change it. "Then you must have armor worthy of your doom," she said at last. "I will go to Hephaestus, the god of the forge. He will make for you a panoply such as the world has never seen." When she left, Achilles stood at the water's edge until dawn. Behind him, the camp still slept in uneasy silence. Before him, the horizon began to glow faintly with the promise of another day, a day he would make terrible. He turned back toward the ships, and for the first time since Patroclus fell, he spoke to his men. His voice was steady, low, but it carried through the camp like thunder through fog. "No more waiting, no more walls. We fight at dawn, not for kings, not for pride. For him, the soldiers bowed their heads, for they saw not a man, but something both mortal and divine, sorrow given form. Even the horses of heaven, Xanthus and Balius, stamped the ground and whinnied, as if they too understood the cost of what was to come. When the first light broke across the sea, it found Achilles still awake. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of fate. And as the sun rose red above the horizon, it seemed to paint the world in warning. The color of blood, the hue of endings. The death of Patroclus had reached Achilles, and with it, the last remnants of mercy in the heart of man. The night stretched deep and endless over the wine-dark sea. In its stillness, stars glimmered like sparks upon an unseen forge. Somewhere beneath those silent constellations, a mother's grief carried her into the realm of the gods. Thetis, silver-footed and sorrow-worn, descended into the hidden valleys of Olympus, where the forges of Hephaestus glowed, like molten suns. The mountain trembled softly with the rhythm of hammer and anvil, iron striking fire, fire striking shape. The air smelled of metal, smoke, and creation itself. The smith god looked up from his work, his face blackened with soot, his eyes bright with endless flame. "My lady of the sea," he said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "What sorrow brings you to my fires tonight?" Thetis knelt beside the anvil's light, her eyes shimmering with the reflections of flame. "My son has lost his dearest companion," she whispered, "and soon he will lose his life. But before that day, he must face the man who took everything from him. He needs armor that no spear can pierce, no god can shame. Hephaestus paused. He had forged many things for gods and kings, swords for heroes, crowns for tyrants, chains for titans. But this request, he knew, was different. This was not the creation of glory. It was the shaping of fate. He nodded once. Then let fire weep with me tonight. He turned to his forge, and the work began. Sparks leapt like stars from his hammer. Molten bronze poured like sunlight made liquid. The walls of the cavern glowed red with the pulse of divine craftsmanship. He shaped the greaves first, smooth and curved to fit mortal legs, yet strong enough to turn aside death. Then the breastplate, its surface rippling with light, reflecting the world as it might have been before sorrow entered it. Upon the shield, he wrought wonders. A city at peace, where children played and lovers danced beneath olive trees. A city at war, where walls burned and warriors fell. Fields of harvest, stars in their courses. The wide sea, forever circling all. He made the earth and sky, the sun and moon, the constellations that watched over men's dreams. And at the shield's center, he set the image of two opposing fates, life and death locked in eternal dance. When the final stroke fell, silence claimed the forge. Even the flames seemed to bow in reverence. Hephaestus lifted the completed armor, and its light filled the cavern like dawn breaking through stone. "Take it to him," he said softly. "But know this, Thetis, no armor can save him from what is written. It can only make his end worthy of song." The sea goddess gathered the gleaming gift in her arms and rose from the depths of Olympus, her heart heavy with both pride and dread. As she ascended, the stars seemed to bend toward her path, whispering of the glory and sorrow soon to come. Below, on the shore of the mortal world, Achilles still sat by Patroclus' body. The fire beside him had burned low, its embers glowing faintly like dying eyes. Around him, the Myrmidons slept uneasily, weapons by their sides, dreams filled with omens. Only Achilles remained awake, his grief too vast to contain, his wrath too bright to dim. When the sea mist thickened and the goddess stepped through it, the world seemed to hush. "My child," she said gently, setting the armor before him, "from the forge of Hephaestus himself. No mortal has ever worn such splendor." Achilles looked upon it, and for a moment, even grief gave way to wonder. The bronze shimmered with the light of every dawn that had ever risen. Each curve, each engraving seemed to breathe. And yet, beneath its beauty, he saw his reflection, a man marked for death. "Mother," he said at last, his voice hollow and low, "this armor will not protect me from what I have become." Thetis touched his cheek, her tears falling like drops of silver. "No," she whispered, "but it will carry your name into eternity." Outside, the sea sighed against the sand. The wind stirred the ashes of the old fire, and in that quiet, somewhere between sorrow and sunrise, the sun of Peleus rose. Tomorrow, he would return to war. Tomorrow, the gods themselves would tremble. Dawn rose heavy and red, the sky painted in shades of blood and fire. It was the kind of morning when even the sea seemed to mourn. Mist clung to the shoreline where Achilles stood, the divine armor of Hephaestus glinting faintly beneath the rising sun. Every piece shimmered as though alive, breathing with the light of Olympus itself. But the man who wore it was not radiant. He was a storm contained in human form, calm only because it had not yet broken. Behind him lay the camp of the Myrmidons. They stood in silent rows, helmets under their arms, eyes downcast. No one spoke. No one dared. They could feel it. The weight of prophecy, the nearing of the end. Before him, by the still gray sea, the body of Patroclus rested, freshly washed, wrapped in white linen, crowned with flowers. The sand around him was marked with footprints, countless, from men who had come to pay respect to the gentlest among them. Now only one remained. Achilles knelt. The sea breeze lifted strands of his golden hair as he bowed his head to his fallen friend. His hand brushed the cold brow. and his voice came low, trembling like thunder beneath the horizon. "I sent you to war wearing my name," he whispered. "I should have gone myself. Now you lie here, and I still breathe. That is my punishment." He touched the earth beside him, gathering dust in his fist. Then he stood, casting it over the linen-shrouded form. "Until I return, Patroclus, wait for me by the gates of Hades. Tell them I will come soon, and that when I do, no Trojan will keep me long." The sea sighed. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured though no clouds marked the sky. Even the gods, it seemed, were listening. When Achilles turned to his men, they saw in his face something beyond wrath, a stillness that terrified them more than fury ever could. "Arm yourselves," he said simply. "We march now." The Myrmidons obeyed. They donned their bronze, took up their spears, and gathered in formation behind their lord. The morning light caught the curve of their shields and spread across the sand like ripples of flame. Each step they took toward the plain sent echoes through the sleeping camp, a rhythm of destiny awakening. As they advanced, the rest of the Argive host stirred to life. Soldiers turned to see who led the line, and when they saw that it was Achilles, a cry rose from 1,000 throats. The sound rolled across the shore like the breaking of a storm wave. "Achilles! Achilles fights again!" Even the wounded rose to watch. Even the weary found their hands gripping weapons once more. Hope, that fragile, dangerous thing, returned to men who had forgotten its taste. On the walls of Troy, the sentries saw the gleam of divine bronze and trembled. Word spread like wildfire. The son of Peleus returns. Hector, standing at the Scaean gate, felt a chill move through his heart. He knew, as surely as the gods did, that his own death had begun to walk toward him. Down on the plain, the first wind of battle began to stir. Dust lifted, sunlight fractured on spear points, and the scent of iron filled the air. Achilles' chariot rolled forward, drawn by his immortal horses, Xanthos and Balios, their eyes bright with unspoken sorrow. The god-forged armor gleamed like a second sun, and behind him the Myrmidons spread like a black tide. When he spoke, his voice carried above the clash of shields and the hiss of the sea. "Today," he said, "we do not fight for kings. We fight for the dead." The army roared, and in that roar, the world shifted. The first charge came swift as lightning. The Trojan front buckled before it. Bronze struck bronze, and the plain shuddered beneath the weight of divine wrath returned to mortal form. Men who had faced death 100 times before fled rather than meet his gaze. Achilles moved through them like fire through dry grass, unstoppable, merciless, magnificent. Far above, the gods watched in uneasy silence. They knew this blaze could not burn long without consuming itself. Zeus turned from Olympus' edge, unwilling to watch what must follow. On the plain below, the heroes' cry split the air, raw and echoing across the centuries. It was not triumph. It was grief wearing the mask of victory. And from that moment on, all who heard it knew. The age of heroes was ending. What followed would not be glory, but reckoning. The sun stood high, swollen and red above the plain. The air trembled with heat, and the scent of iron filled the wind. What had begun as battle had become something else. A cleansing, a reckoning, a fury that no mortal could contain. Achilles drove his chariot through the ranks of men, as if through shadows. His divine armor blazed so brightly that even his own allies dared not look too long upon it. Around him, the Myrmidons followed like wolves behind a storm, their spears wet with the blood of Troy's sons. Each stroke of his blade, each thrust of his spear, seemed to cry out Patroclus' name, not as prayer, but as vengeance, not as remembrance, but as promise kept. Where he passed, men fell like grain before the scythe. He spared no one, neither prince nor peasant, neither supplicant nor soldier. Mercy had fled the field long before he came. Only death remained to greet him. The earth drank deeply of the blood he spilled, and soon even the river Scamander, sacred to the gods, ran red and sluggish with the weight of the slain. bodies clogged its current, armor flashing beneath the surface like trapped stars. The water hissed and frothed as though in pain. At last, the river spoke. Its voice rose like thunder from its depths. "Son of Peleus," it cried, "enough! You defile my waters, choking them with the dead. If Zeus has granted you victory, then drive the living from the plain, but do not heap the dead upon my stream." But Achilles, drunk on wrath, heard nothing but his own heartbeat. He leapt into the shallows, his spear flashing like lightning. The river surged against him in fury. Its waves rose, tall as city walls, crashing down with the strength of mountains. For a moment, it seemed the mortal might be swept away, drowned not by an army, but by the world itself. Achilles fought as though against a living god. He slashed at the water, cursed the flood, but the current only grew stronger, coiling around his legs, pulling him under. For the first time since Patroclus' death, fear touched him. He gasped and raised his face to the sky. "Father Zeus," he cried, "have you no pity? Must I die here, lost and forgotten, drowned like a herdsman caught in the storm?" High on Olympus, the gods heard, and one, Hephaestus, the smith who had forged his armor, took pity. He loosed his own element upon the world. Fire answered water. The plain itself burned. Flames roared across the banks, turning reeds and corpses alike to ash. Steam rose in great white clouds as the river screamed and shrank. Its once proud voice faltered into murmurs of retreat. The waters drew back, leaving blackened ground and smoldering bones. Panting, soaked, and streaked with soot, Achilles stood in the shallows, the steam curling around him like ghosts of those he had slain. He was terrible to behold, a man who had wrestled the elements and won, but at a cost no mortal could bear for long. He climbed from the dying river, his armor glowing faintly with the heat of the god's flame. Every breath came ragged, every heartbeat slower, heavier. He knew the truth. No man who fights the gods walks away unchanged. But still he pressed on. Still he called for Hector. "Come forth," he shouted toward the city walls. "Come and face me. For every life I have taken, one remains yours." From Troy's ramparts, women wept. Old men turned their faces away, for they too felt it, the pull of destiny tightening like a noose. In the sky, even Apollo watched in silence. He knew his own part would soon come, when prophecy would close its hand around both hunter and prey. The river's ashes smoked behind Achilles. The earth stank of fire and ruin, and though victory was his shadow now stretched long across the dying plain, the shadow of one who had gone too far to ever return. When the sun dipped low, its reflection shimmered upon the still pools left by Scamander's retreat. For a moment, they looked like mirrors, and in them, Achilles saw not a hero, but a man already fading into myth. The evening fell upon Troy like a veil of bronze. The plain, still smoking from the fires of the river, lay strewn with the remnants of war, broken chariots, shattered shields, and the nameless dead. The cries of the wounded faded into silence. Only the slow rhythm of the sea and the rustle of the wind among the spears remained. And across that haunted plain walked Achilles. His armor, forged by gods, glowed faintly in the fading light. Each step he took left a print darkened by blood and dust. The air trembled around him. Even the birds dared not sing. Behind him, the myrmidons followed in grim silence, their faces hard as stone. Before him, the walls of Troy stood high and golden in the dusk, reflecting the last fire of the sun. Atop those ancient ramparts, men of Troy peered down, hearts frozen, for they had seen what the son of Peleus had done, how no man, no god, no river could stand against him. And among them, watching from the gate, was Hector. He wore his polished bronze, but its gleam no longer seemed like glory. It looked instead like the reflection of a doomed flame. His spear felt heavy in his hand, not from fear, but from the weight of everything he fought for. His city, his wife, his child, and the fragile thread of honor that bound them all. From the tower, Priam, the old king, called to him with trembling voice, "Hector, my son, do not face that man alone. He is not mortal any longer. He is wrath made flesh. Come within the walls. The city still needs its heart." And Hecuba, his mother, wept beside him. "My child," she cried, "I bore you for sorrow. Pity me, for if you die, I shall die before your body cools. Come back, my son. Do not meet your death outside these gates." But Hector stood unmoving. His eyes, deep and calm, never left the figure striding across the plain. "I have brought enough shame to the house of Priam," he said quietly. "If I flee now, they will call me coward, and my name will burn in my son's memory. Better to face him and fall, than to live and watch Troy die." He took a deep breath and stepped beyond the gate. The great doors closed behind him with the sound of finality, like a tomb ceiling. The plain stretched before him, vast and empty, save for the one man walking toward him with fire in his heart. When Achilles saw him, he stopped. The distance between them was filled with wind and dust, the faint echo of 1,000 deaths that had led to this one moment. They circled each other slowly, like constellations that had always been destined to collide. Neither spoke at first, only the sound of bronze shifting and the whisper of the dying day. At last, Hector broke the silence. "Son of Peleus," he said, "I know you seek my life, and I do not deny you your vengeance. But swear to me this, when I am dead, return my body to my father. Let him lay me upon the pyre, that I may pass with honor to the land of the dead." Achilles' eyes held no warmth, no mercy. He spoke as one who had forgotten the taste of pity. "There are no oaths between lions and men," he said. "Between us, there will be no peace until one drinks the dust." Then came the clash. Spears flashed like lightning. Shields rang like thunder. Bronze met bronze, and the air itself seemed to cry out. Hector lunged, swift and sure, but Achilles moved like something not bound by flesh. The god-forged shield turned every blow. The divine spear struck only once, but it was enough. It found the narrow space between collarbone and throat, a whisper of death, precise and merciless. The force of it lifted Hector from his feet. He fell slowly, as though the world could not bear to see him fall at all. The dust rose, and with it his final breath. "Remember this day," he whispered, "for your death will follow mine." Achilles looked down upon him, at the man who had slain his friend, at the hero who had stood alone before the gates of his city, and saw not an enemy, but a mirror. Yet wrath does not leave space for mercy. He bound Hector's lifeless body to his chariot, the leather cutting through flesh and silence alike. When he turned toward the sea, the setting sun painted them both in red. Behind the walls, Andromache's cry rose like the breaking of the world. She tore the veil from her hair, for she knew that where her husband's body went, Troy's fate would soon follow. And as the chariot moved, dragging glory through dust, the night itself seemed to mourn. Its stars dimmed, its wind stilled, as if even the heavens wept, for the death of honor beneath the wheels of vengeance. Night fell quietly over the plain of Troy. The fires of the Argive camp flickered like a ring of dying stars, their smoke drifting into the vast, indifferent sky. And from the distance, faint and rhythmic, came the sound of wheels upon stone, the whisper of bronze and sand. Achilles was returning, behind his chariot, bound by the ankles with rawhide thongs. Trailed the broken body of Hector, the once proud champion of Troy, who had stood like a wall before his city, now followed his conqueror through dust and shadow. His golden hair, dulled with earth, left a faint path in the sand. The armor that had gleamed like sunlight on the walls now hung shattered and mute, and above them both, the moon rose pale and cold, bearing silent witness to what wrath had wrought. The Myrmidons followed their lord back to camp in silence. No cheer rose for this victory. Even among killers hardened by years of war, there was unease. Something sacred had been broken, something beyond mortal law. They looked upon their commander, his armor radiant with godly fire, his eyes hollow, and felt the chill of prophecy in their bones. Achilles drove without a word until he reached the sea. There, before his tent, he stopped. The waves broke softly against the shore, washing faintly at the blood-stained sand. He stood for a long time beside the chariot, staring at the twisted shape behind him. Then, with movements slow and deliberate, he unhitched the horses and left Hector's body lying in the dirt, as though it were not a man at all, but an offering to his grief. The Myrmidons dared not speak. They watched as their lord sat down beside Patroclus' pyre, where the embers still glowed faintly in the night. For hours he said nothing. The wind shifted. The stars wheeled overhead. When at last he spoke, his voice was low, and each word fell like a stone into water. "Do you see, my friend? I have kept my promise. He lies here, as you lie here, and yet you are still gone." He rested a hand on the earth beside Patroclus' grave, and for the first time since the war began, the great Achilles wept. No sound, no wild lament, only tears that fell silently onto the ground, tears the sea breeze carried away before they could touch the sand. But grief, once loosed, does not fade easily. The next dawn, and the next, and the next, he harnessed his immortal horses again, and each morning he dragged Hector's body 3 times around the tomb of Patroclus. The dust rose like incense. The cries of men and gods alike reached Olympus, and yet the body did not decay. For Apollo, guardian of Troy, took pity on the fallen son of Priam. Each night, while the Argive camp slept, the god descended upon the plain. He brushed the dust from Hector's wounds, healed the torn flesh, and restored the form that men might remember him by, so that even in death, he would not be shamed beyond remembrance. Still, Achilles did not stop. His vengeance had become his breath, and without it, he feared he might vanish into the same silence that claimed his friend. The gods began to murmur. Even Zeus frowned upon the cruelty of the son of Peleus. "Enough," the father of thunder said. "Let wrath rest. The living cannot hate forever." But mortals are slower to forgive than gods, and Achilles' heart, though half divine, was all too human in its suffering. On the walls of Troy, Priam watched each day's desecration through veiled tears. His beard was white now, his strength gone. Every sunrise, he thought he had no more grief to give, and every evening proved him wrong. Beside him, Hecuba tore her hair, and Andromache knelt in silent prayer before the hearth, her son asleep in her arms, too young to know the shadow that had fallen upon his name. Even the wind seemed to mourn. It carried the scent of smoke and salt, and the low murmur of waves against the shore sounded like the breathing of the dead. The world itself had grown weary of vengeance, and yet far off, in the heart of the Argive camp, a god's whisper began to stir, a quiet voice sent by Zeus, calling upon old Priam to make a journey few men dared, a journey through the enemy's camp, to kneel before the hands that had killed his son, and ask for mercy from a heart that no longer believed in it. But that would come with another night. For now, the chariot wheels stilled, the fires dimmed, and upon the dark shore of the wine-colored sea, Achilles sat between 2 graves, one fresh, one waiting, and the tide washed quietly at his feet, as if the world, too, wished to wash away his sorrow. The nights grew longer after Hector's fall. The fires of the Argive camp flickered dimly across the plain, and the waves whispered of grief to the unmoving stars. Even the gods grew restless, for each dawn brought the same sight, the son of Peleus dragging the body of the fallen prince around the tomb of Patroclus, his chariot wheels carving endless circles in the dust, his vengeance repeating like a prayer that had forgotten its words. On Olympus, the immortals gathered in silent council. Their marble halls glowed faintly with starlight, and the air shimmered with the soft hum of eternity. But the stillness there was uneasy, as though even the heavens could not bear the weight of what one mortal had become. At last Zeus spoke. His voice rolled across the golden floor like distant thunder. "Enough," he said, and the word echoed through the peaks of the world. "This man has turned grief into blasphemy. Hector lies dishonored, though his heart was just, and the earth itself groans beneath this cruelty. Even the river he defiled still weeps with blood." The goddess Hera bowed her head, for she had long admired Achilles' strength, but now his wrath frightened even her. Athena, ever the champion of men's reason, said softly, "He has lost what made him human. Vengeance has devoured all but the shadow of his soul." Apollo, golden-haired and mournful, stepped forward, his radiance dimmed with sorrow. "Let me go to Troy," he said. "I have tended the body each night, so that it might not rot, for even in death Hector was noble. But I can do no more unless the will of Zeus commands it." And Zeus, whose word binds both gods and men, nodded slowly. "Go then, far shooter. Speak to Thetis, mother of the broken one. Tell her to whisper to her son that enough blood has been spilled, that pity must return to the heart of man, and summon Iris, for there is another who must move before this tale can rest." The messenger goddess bowed her rainbow head and vanished, her trail painting light across the clouds. Down she flew, through the cool reaches of dawn, through the scent of sea foam and salt wind, until she came to Thetis, silver-footed, sitting among her sisters in the deeps. The sea goddess looked up, her hair flowing around her like moonlit waves. "I know why you come," she said softly, before Iris could speak. "My child's heart is breaking itself upon the stones. He cannot stop. He no longer remembers how to live without anger." "Then remind him," Iris whispered, "for the will of Zeus is spoken. Let mercy temper wrath, lest even heroes become monsters in the songs of men." Thetis rose, and the sea rose with her. The foam curled around her ankles as she walked toward the surface. Above, the world shimmered faintly with dawn. When she stepped upon the shore, the camp lay quiet, soldiers still in their dreams, fires low and red. Only one figure was awake. Achilles sat beside the sea, his head bowed, the ashes of last night's fire smoldering beside him. The armor of Hephaestus gleamed faintly in the half-light, but the man within it looked small, a child lost inside a god's creation. "My son," Thetis said, her voice carrying the hush of the tide, "Zeus has spoken. The gods grow weary of your sorrow. They pity even the one who killed your friend." Achilles did not lift his gaze. "Pity?" he murmured. "What has pity ever given me? It did not save Patroclus. It will not save me." Thetis knelt beside him, her hand upon his shoulder. "Then let it save your soul," she whispered. "Priam, the father of Hector, will come to you soon. He will come alone, through the dark, to beg for his son's body. You must let him. It is the will of the gods." At those words, something changed in Achilles' face. A flicker, small as a dying ember, but real. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was the first breath of mercy returning to the hollow space, where wrath had lived too long. "I will obey," he said quietly, "but the world will never wash this blood from me." And Thetis, who knew all that was to come, laid her hand against his cheek and said, "No, my child, but even blood fades in the sea." Then she vanished into the waves, leaving Achilles alone beneath a pale, new sky. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and ash, and far off, across the plain, Troy's walls shimmered like the edge of a dream. Somewhere within those walls, an old king stirred, his heart heavy with both terror and love, and the gods watched, for the hour of mercy was at last drawing near. Night settled over Troy like a shroud. The stars hung low above the broken plain, their light trembling upon the edges of spears left standing where heroes had fallen. Inside the city, the fires had burned low, and the people slept the restless sleep of those who dream of the dead. But in the palace of Priam, there was no sleep. The old king sat alone upon the stone steps of his hall, his head bowed, his hands trembling against the weight of time. The sounds of mourning still echoed faintly in the corridors. The soft weeping of women, the hollow wail of flutes, the whisper of servants who did not dare speak the prince's name. Hector's armor hung upon the wall, empty now, gleaming faintly in the torchlight. Beside it lay his child's small toy chariot, abandoned in a corner, its wheels still stained with dust from gentler days. Priam's eyes lingered upon it as if it could still move, as if by sheer will he might wind the world backward and bring his son home again. Then, through the silence, a presence filled the air. Not wind, not shadow, but something that stilled the heart. Iris, the messenger of gods, stood before him in robes that shimmered with the colors of dawn. Her voice came soft, like rain upon marble. "Priam, son of Dardanus, beloved of Zeus," she said, "the father of gods and men has taken pity on you. He bids you go to the ships of the Achaeans to ransom your son's body. Bring no army, no guards, only a single herald to drive your mules and wagon. And fear not, for Hermes, guide of souls, will walk unseen beside you through the camp of your enemies." For a long moment, Priam did not breathe. To walk into the camp of the slayer of his son, it was a task for madness or faith. And in his heart, there was no difference between the two. He rose slowly, feeling the ache of age in every limb. "Then so be it," he whispered. "If the gods command it, I will go. What life remains to me is measured only by my love for him." He summoned his herald, Idaeus, and together they gathered treasures from the palace storerooms. Rich robes woven by Trojan queens, a cloak dyed deep with Tyrian purple, 12 talents of gold, 2 gleaming tripods, and a great chalice carved from onyx and silver. Each piece glimmered faintly as it was loaded onto the wagon, offerings for the man who had taken a king's son and a mother's joy. When all was ready, Priam embraced his wife one last time. Hecuba clung to him, her tears wet against his wrinkled cheek. "Do not go," she pleaded. "You will not return. He has no heart. He will kill you as he killed our son." But Priam only touched her face gently, his eyes calm in their sorrow. "I must," he said, "for there is no life left in this house until Hector's body sleeps in its tomb." And with that, he stepped into the night. Outside the city gate, Hermes waited, veiled in moonlight, unseen by mortal eyes. When Priam's chariot rolled forward, the god walked beside it, his sandaled feet making no sound upon the stones. The mules trod softly, their breath white in the chill air. Down from the walls of Troy they went, through the fields where ghosts seemed to stir in the starlight, past the blackened wreckage of chariots and the gleam of fallen spears. No sentry saw them, for Hermes wrapped them in his shadow, and even the watchfires burned lower as they passed. In the stillness, Priam spoke quietly to the god who guided him, though he did not yet know his name. "Tell me, stranger," he said, "is there any mercy left in the hearts of men?" And Hermes answered softly, "There is, old king, but it sleeps most often beneath the weight of grief. Tonight, perhaps, it may wake again." So they went on, through the sleeping camp of the Achaeans, where warriors lay dreaming of home, and the sea murmured beyond the dunes. At last they came to the tent of Achilles, its light flickering faintly like a heartbeat in the dark. Hermes touched Priam's shoulder. "Here your courage must stand alone," he said. "Go now, and speak to him as a father speaks to a son." Then the god vanished, leaving only silence and the whisper of the waves. Priam stood before the tent flap, his old hands trembling, his breath shallow. He bowed his head once, then entered. Inside, Achilles sat beside the dying fire, his gaze fixed upon the embers. Behind him, the body of Hector lay, shrouded in linen, its form untouched by decay, its face peaceful at last. For a long time, neither man spoke. The sea breathed outside, and the world seemed to wait. Then the old king fell to his knees, and kissed the hands that had killed his son. "Remember your father," he said, "and pity me." And so began the final act of mercy. The air inside the tent was heavy with silence. The fire had burned low, its last embers glowing like eyes in the dark. Achilles sat motionless beside them, his hands clasped, his shadow stretching long across the ground. And before him knelt Priam, the old king of Troy, barefoot, trembling, his silver beard wet with tears. For a long while, Achilles did not move. He could not. It was as though the world itself had paused between two heartbeats, between vengeance and forgiveness, between wrath and something older than war. When he finally spoke, his voice came low, rough, unsteady. "Old man," he said, "how dare you come here alone, through the dark, to the tent of the man who has killed so many of your sons?" Priam lifted his head. His eyes were hollow, but there was no fear in them, only the weary dignity of a father who had nothing left to lose. "I have endured what no mortal should endure," he said softly. "I have kissed the hands that have slain my child. But I remember your father, Peleus, a man of age and sorrow, still waiting for his son's return. You are all he has left in this world, and I am what he will be soon, a father robbed of his son. Pity me, Achilles. Remember him, and in remembering, remember yourself." The words struck deeper than any spear. For the first time since Patroclus had fallen, Achilles' breath faltered. He saw in this frail old man not an enemy, but a mirror, a reflection of his own father, his own fate, the loneliness that awaited them both. Without a word, he rose. Then, slowly, he took Priam by the hand and lifted him from the ground. The touch was gentle, and for an instant, the boundary between victor and vanquished disappeared. "Sit beside me," Achilles said quietly. "Let our sorrows rest together, if only for this night." They sat by the dying fire, two men bound not by hatred but by grief. Outside, the sea whispered against the shore, and the faintest hint of dawn trembled beyond the canvas walls. Achilles called for bread and wine, and the servants came silently, their eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of the Trojan, king alive, within their camp. They spread a simple meal between them, bread coarse as the soil they fought over, wine dark as the blood that had been spilled. Priam ate little, his hands shaking as he lifted the cup. Achilles watched him in silence. He could feel Patroclus' absence beside him like a wound that would never heal. But somehow, in the presence of this grieving father, the pain felt less sharp, less endless. When the meal was done, Achilles spoke again. "Your son fought bravely," he said. "He was noble, and the gods loved him. He did not die a coward's death. You have my word. His body shall be returned untouched. Let him be honored as he deserves." Priam bowed his head, and for the first time in many days, tears came freely. "May the gods remember you for this mercy," he whispered. "May your name outlast the ruins of both our cities." Achilles turned toward the shrouded form that lay near the wall. "Your son sleeps there," he said. "I kept him close, as I kept my friend, for both were bound to me in ways words cannot explain. Tomorrow I will stop my vengeance. You shall have 12 days for the rites. No Achaean shall raise a hand against Troy until the fire has burned low." Priam rose unsteadily and went to the body. He knelt, pulled back the linen, and looked upon his son's face. It was calm, untouched by violence, as though the gods themselves had guarded his rest. He touched the cold cheek and whispered words that no one heard. When he returned to Achilles, the warrior was staring into the coals, his eyes far away, his heart caught between memory and prophecy. "Sleep here tonight," Achilles said softly. "The road back to Troy is long, and dawn will find you safer beneath my roof." So the old king lay upon a pallet beside the fire, and sleep, long denied him, came at last. Not the peaceful sleep of the untroubled, but the deep, exhausted rest of a man who has emptied his soul. Achilles watched him for a long time. He thought of his own father, waiting by the shores of Phthia. He thought of Patroclus, now beyond all waiting. And then, without meaning to, he too lay down beside the embers, And for the first time since the war began, he dreamed not of battle, but of home. Outside, the sea breathed softly against the sand. Above, the stars turned in their eternal silence. And in that tent, for one night only, the gods allowed mercy to live among men. Dawn came pale and trembling across the sea. The first light touched the canvas of Achilles' tent, turning the air a soft gold, as though the gods themselves wished not to wake the sleepers within. Inside, two figures lay in uneasy peace, one young and terrible, one old and broken, and between them, the still body of a prince awaited its final journey. Achilles rose first. He moved quietly, so as not to wake Priam, and stood for a moment watching the old king's breath move softly beneath the folds of his cloak. There was something sacred in that sight, the conqueror keeping vigil beside the father of the man he had slain. Even the sea outside seemed to hush its voice. When the dawn had fully bloomed, Achilles went to the place where Hector lay. The linen shroud gleamed faintly in the morning light, the faint scent of myrrh and cedar rising from it. He knelt beside the body and bowed his head. "Sleep now, Prince of Troy," he murmured. "The wrath that bound us has ended. The world will remember us both, not for our hate, but for the grief it left behind." Then he called for his men. The Myrmidons came, silent as shadows. They lifted the body gently and laid it upon the wagon Priam had brought, covering it with woven tapestries of crimson and gold. The treasure Priam had offered as ransom glittered in the dawn beside it. Gifts for the living, tokens for the dead. When all was ready, Achilles stepped back. He looked to the old king, now awake and leaning upon his staff. "Go," he said softly. "Your son awaits his homecoming. And know this, no spear shall rise against you or those who bear him. The gods have given you 12 days of peace. After that, the war may begin again, but for now, even anger must rest." Priam bowed deeply, his voice trembling with gratitude and weariness. "You have given me more than gold could buy, Achilles. You have given me the face of my son once more." The young warrior nodded, saying nothing more. Words could no longer mend what the years had torn. He watched as the old man mounted the wagon, as the mules took their slow, steady steps away from the camp, as the long shadow of loss stretched between them and the sea. For a long time after they were gone, Achilles stood upon the shore. The wind moved through his hair. The waves broke and retreated, again and again, each one whispering something too ancient to be named. When at last he turned away, his armor no longer gleamed. It seemed dimmer now, as though the fire of vengeance had gone out of it. On the road to Troy, the dawn widened into day. The plain lay still beneath a fragile peace, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and dust. As the wagon approached the city gates, the watchman cried out in wonder. The gates opened wide, and the people of Troy poured forth like a river of grief. Women tore their veils and scattered dust upon their heads. Men fell to their knees. The children, not yet old enough to understand death, clutched their mothers' robes and wept because everyone else did. Andromache was the first to reach the wagon. Her cry broke the air like a torn string. She fell upon Hector's body, her hands trembling as she touched the face she had once loved in laughter and now only in memory. Behind her came Hecuba, keening softly, her voice cracked but still beautiful, like the echo of a temple song long abandoned. Even Paris, whose choices had brought so much ruin, stood silent, his pride dissolved in the sight of what war had cost. Priam, his strength nearly gone, raised his hands to the crowd. "My son has returned," he said, his voice hoarse yet steady. "He who was our shield and our pride sleeps now among us. Let there be mourning, and let no man speak of battle until he is at peace." The people obeyed. They bore Hector through the streets on their shoulders, singing low and slow, a song older than the city itself, a song of farewell, of love, of the dust to which all kings return. At the foot of the citadel, they built the pyre. They laid the body upon it, wrapped in robes of gold and purple, garlanded with olive leaves. When the fire took, it rose with a deep, gentle roar, and the smoke curled upward toward the indifferent stars. Priam watched until only ashes remained. Then he gathered them in a golden urn and placed it within the tomb they had prepared, a simple chamber of stone, beautiful not in splendor but in silence. When it was done, he spoke softly, not to the crowd, not to the gods, but to the wind. "Sleep well, my son. You have given Troy its last breath of honor." And as the people drifted away, the sun dipped behind the walls, and the plain of Troy was quiet again. The war was not over, but for the first time in years, the earth was still. Night fell gently over the sea. The wind that had once screamed through the masts now moved only in sighs, brushing the sand with a mother's tenderness. Among the ships, the fires burned low, their light fading to amber as warriors, exhausted by years of killing, drifted into uneasy dreams. Only Achilles remained awake. He sat by the water's edge, the surf touching his feet, the same sea that had given him birth. His armor lay beside him, the divine bronze dulled by ash and time. Above, the stars moved in their ancient courses, silent, exact, untouched by the struggles of men. He watched them with the stillness of one who had come to understand that victory and loss are only different words for the same truth. Behind him, the myrmidons slept. The sound of their breathing was steady, the rhythm of ordinary men who had followed an extraordinary fate. Achilles looked back at them, at the tents, the black shapes of the ships, the pale scars of old campfires. He felt, for the first time, the quiet ache of weariness, not of the body, but of the soul, the kind of weariness that comes when even glory tastes of dust. In the silence, he thought of Patroclus. He could still see his friend smile, hear the gentle teasing, feel the warmth of a hand upon his shoulder before battle. For all the gods had promised him endless fame, songs that would outlast empires. None of it filled the hollow left behind by that absence. The night pressed close, carrying the faint perfume of burnt offerings from Troy's walls, where mourners still sang of Hector. Two men bound by fate, now bound equally by death. From the distance came the faintest echo, a lyre string plucked in some soldier's tent. The sound wove through the dark like a memory, and Achilles smiled faintly. Once, he too had played the lyre. Long ago, before the war, before the wrath, when Thetis' son had been merely a boy learning songs on Pelian slopes. He had believed then that music might be enough. Now he knew better, that music and war are only different tongues of the same longing, the wish to leave a mark upon silence. He rose at last and walked along the beach. Each step left a shallow print that the tide quickly erased. He thought of his mother beneath the waves, her voice a whisper of sorrow that he would never again hear. She had warned him, "You may live long and forgotten, or die young and eternal." And he, proud and bright as morning, had chosen the flame. Now that flame burned low, yet he did not regret it. He had lived as the gods demand men live, fully, fiercely, without pause for fear. The moon climbed high, pale and vast, and in its silver light he saw his reflection in the surf, a face both young and ancient, the eyes of a man who had seen too much. He wondered, briefly, if Patroclus could see him from the halls of Hades, if Hector's shade stood beside him there, and if together they spoke of the war still raging above. He liked to think they did, that in the end, enemies might find peace in death where life had offered none. From behind him, a soft voice spoke. "Lord Achilles," said Automedon, his charioteer, "the men ask if you will rest." Achilles turned, smiling faintly. "Rest will come soon enough," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of prophecy. He dismissed the young man with a nod, then looked once more toward the dark horizon, where Troy slept behind her walls. The fires upon those walls flickered like dying stars. He could sense it now, the shape of what was coming, not in visions or omens, but in the deep stillness of his heart. The gods were not finished with him. Fate, patient and precise, waited just beyond the next sunrise. He bent to the water and let it run through his fingers. It was cold, alive, and different, a reminder that even heroes are but foam upon the sea. Bright for a moment, then gone. The tide whispered over his hands as if blessing him. He thought, for an instant, that he heard his mother's voice in its murmur. "Soon, my son. Soon you will come home." He sat there until dawn brushed the sky with gold. When the first bird cried from the dunes, he rose, lifted his armor, and slung his spear across his back. The metal was heavy, but it no longer felt like a burden. Each plate gleamed faintly in the newborn light. By the time the sun stood over the sea, the myrmidons stirred. They found their lord already awake, already waiting, his face calm, his eyes clear as if he had slept 1,000 peaceful years. None spoke, but they knew. The long silence before destiny had ended. That day, no one sharpened blades or oiled armor. No one spoke of victory or spoils. The camp was hushed, caught between memory and prophecy. And somewhere beyond the walls, the god of the silver bow prepared his arrow. Morning came soft and golden, painting the tents and the black ships in hues of honey and ash. The sea was calm, its slow breathing almost human. The wind carried no omen, no warning, only the faint sound of waves folding themselves against the shore, as if the world itself wished to keep its peace a little longer. Achilles stood at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon where Troy's towers shimmered through the haze. His armor shone faintly in the sun, no longer the blazing fire of wrath, but a steady glow, tempered by all he had lost. He spoke little as he readied his chariot. The myrmidons watched in silence, sensing what words could not touch. "Today," he said finally, his voice quiet but unyielding, "we bring this war to its turning." It was not a boast, nor a promise, only the simple truth of a man who had long understood his own story's end. The horses stamped and snorted, their manes glinting like molten gold. Xanthus turned his great head slightly, eyes luminous with something that was almost sorrow. Achilles touched the creature's neck. "No prophecy today," he murmured with a small smile. "Only speed." Then, with a shout, he loosed the reins, and the chariot surged forward, like lightning uncoiling from the sky. The plain of Troy opened before him, vast sunlit, soaked in memories of blood. The clash of men and bronze rose around him once more, but now it sounded distant, muffled, like thunder from another world. He moved through it all with terrible grace, a figure of calm amid chaos, striking with precision, never in anger, almost tender in his efficiency. Each fallen foe was a name soon to be forgotten, another shadow joining the dust. Even the gods watched in silence. For all their immortal intrigues, none could match the strange beauty of this mortal moment. A man so brilliant in his dying, he made eternity itself pause. High upon Troy's wall, Apollo watched too. The far shooter's golden hair shimmered in the sun, his bow resting lightly in his divine hands. He had loved this mortal once, in the way gods sometimes love men who burn too brightly. But love among the immortals is a dangerous thing. It turns to pity, and pity becomes envy. The order had been given long ago. The son of Peleus must not return home. The archer god sighed. "Even fire," he whispered, "must go out." Down below, Paris, the forgotten prince, the spark of this long tragedy, stood trembling beside the temple's gate. His hands, delicate and unsteady, clutched the bow Apollo had blessed. He did not want this fate. He was no warrior, no hero. But fate rarely asks what mortals want. "Draw," came the whisper, soft and divine. The string pulled taut. The arrow gleamed like sunlight caught in glass. And before Paris could even think to pray, Apollo's invisible hand guided its flight. Across the plain it flew, so silent that even the wind did not stir. It found him where all the gods had decreed it would, the heel, the one place the water of Styx had not touched, the single thread of mortality left in a man half made of divinity. There was no great cry, no thunderous collapse, only a sudden stillness. Achilles staggered once, the light shifting in his eyes. He looked down, almost in disbelief, at the slender shaft lodged in his flesh. Around him, the battle still raged, but it sounded far away now. He dropped his spear, its bronze head sinking softly into the earth. One hand went to the wound, more in wonder than pain. Then he smiled, a small, almost peaceful smile. "So," he whispered to no one, "it comes at last." He sank to one knee, then the other. The world tilted gently around him. The sun seemed suddenly brighter, the air sweeter, as if every color had deepened for this one final moment. He thought of Patroclus, of the lyre, of the sea. He thought of his mother's voice calling through the waves, and of his father, old and waiting, somewhere far away. He felt none of the fear men say comes with dying, only a quiet recognition, the knowledge that he had lived exactly as he was meant to, bravely, beautifully, tragically. As his body fell, the earth caught him gently, as though it had been waiting. The sound of the chariot faded. The dust rose softly around his form, glowing faintly in the morning light. Even the fighting slowed, as if every soldier, friend and foe alike, felt the same shiver run through the world, the sense that something vast and irreplaceable had just ended. Above him, Apollo lowered his bow. A single tear traced the god's perfect cheek. He turned away, unable to watch as the Myrmidons gathered around their fallen lord, their cries rising like wind through broken reeds. The sea, hearing of his death, sent its waves farther up the shore, as if to claim its child once more. And Thetis, in her silver chambers beneath the depths, felt her heart break anew. That evening, as the sun sank red into the horizon, the wind carried his name across the plain, and it echoed in the stones of Troy, in the waves of the sea, in the hearts of men and gods alike. Achilles, a name that would never fade, a flame that would never truly go out. The sea was still the next morning. No wind stirred the ships. No gulls cried above the masts. It was as if the world itself held its breath, afraid to disturb the silence that followed a god's son's final heartbeat. By the shore where he had fallen, the Myrmidons knelt in a ring. Their spears were planted in the sand, points downward, as if mourning themselves. No one spoke. Even the waves that lapped at their feet came softly, like footsteps in a temple. When at last Automedon found his voice, it came cracked and fragile. "He died as he lived," he whispered, undefeated. The others bowed their heads, for though death had claimed their lord, it had not conquered him. His face, even in stillness, bore the faintest trace of peace, like a flame gone quiet, but not gone out. Far beneath the surface of the sea, Thetis heard the silence before her son's name reached her. The cry of his death echoed through the salt and coral, a sound no mortal could make, a note that split the heart of the ocean itself. She rose from her silver halls, with her nymph sisters in her wake, a procession of grief shimmering like moonlight through deep water. When she reached the shore, dawn had just begun to climb the sky. Her feet touched the sand, and every droplet of seawater turned to tears. She went to her child and knelt beside him. Her hands that had once bathed him as a baby, now traced the hard lines of armor and bone. "Oh, my son," she whispered, her voice soft as surf. "You were the brightest flame the world has ever known." She laid her cheek against his and closed her eyes. Around her, the air trembled with sorrow. Even the gods, watching from Olympus, turned their faces away. Agamemnon came first among men to the place, his face gray with awe. Behind him followed Odysseus, Diomedes, and great Ajax, each warrior who had once fought beside or against him. None could meet the eyes of the sea-born mother. Her grief was too sacred, too immense. At her nod, they began to prepare the pyre. Logs were gathered from the surrounding hills, oak and cedar, fragrant pine and myrtle. Each man carried his burden in silence, as though building not a fire, but an altar. The pyre rose tall as a tower, ringed by garlands of laurel and armor gleaming like frozen suns. At its center lay Achilles, wrapped in fine linen woven by Thetis's hand, his golden hair spread upon the cloth like rays of dawn. When the structure was ready, the Greeks stood back in a circle. Thetis raised her arms to the heavens, and her sisters sang. It was not a song of mortal grief. It was older, deeper, a melody that moved through the air like tidewater through a cavern. A song of endings and beginnings, of return and release. Men wept without knowing why. Even the hardened veterans of Troy's long siege felt their hearts tremble. At last, Thetis took a torch from the hand of Hephaestus himself, the god who had forged her son's armor. She touched the flame to the pyre, and it caught instantly, burning with a light not of this world, white, blue, and gold at once. The fire rose higher, singing as it devoured the wood. No smoke stained the sky. It carried only light. The Myrmidons lifted their voices then, not in mourning, but in honor. They recited his deeds. The duels won. The seas crossed. The gods defied. Each word fell into the air like an offering, and through it all, the flames never dimmed. When the fire at last subsided to embers, Thetis stepped forward. From the ashes, untouched by the blaze, lay his bones, pure white, faintly glowing. She gathered them in a golden urn, weeping as she did so, her tears hissing softly where they fell upon the coals. Then she turned to the Greeks. "Build him a tomb upon this shore," she said, "high enough for sailors to see from the sea. Let it stand not as a monument to war, but as a reminder that even the greatest of men are only mortal, and even gods weep for love." And so they did. For 12 days they labored, piling stones and shaping marble, raising a mound vast and bright as a mountain under the sun. They placed the urn at its heart, and over it carved no words, only a single image, a spear poised above a calm sea. When all was done, Thetis stood one last time at the edge of the surf. She looked back at the tomb, at the world she would never again visit, and whispered to the wind, "Sleep now, my child. The world will remember." Then she turned and walked into the waves. The sea closed over her, and the water shone where she had passed, as though the ocean itself carried her sorrow into its endless heart. That night, as the Greeks lay sleeping by their ships, a strange calm filled the air. The war seemed far away, the world almost kind, and above them the stars burned quietly, not as witnesses to glory or vengeance, but as silent keepers of remembrance. The pyre's glow had long faded, leaving only ash and silence, yet the air still seemed to tremble, as though the memory of fire lingered. Every man in the camp felt it, the absence that weighed more than presence ever could. Achilles was gone, and with him, something vast and unspoken had left the world. For days, no horn sounded, no armor clashed, no songs rose in the night. Even the sea seemed subdued, its waves moving softly against the sand, as if afraid to disturb the sleep of the fallen. In the mornings, the Myrmidons gathered by the tomb. They brought small offerings, wine, bread, flowers gathered from scrub hills. Sometimes Automedon would speak to the mound as though his lord could still hear. He told him of the tides, the movement of ships, the cries of the gulls. It was easier than silence. Odysseus came often too, walking with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes distant. He had seen many deaths in his long life of wars and wanderings, but none had felt like this. None had burned so deeply into the fabric of the world. He stood before the mound one dawn and whispered, "Your wrath ended the world of heroes. What comes next will be something lesser, but perhaps something wiser." Behind him, Agamemnon's tent stood quiet. The great king no longer boasted. His voice, once sharp with command, now carried the fatigue of a man who had finally understood the price of pride. He knew, though he would never admit it aloud, that Achilles' death had taken the heart from the Achaean host. Their victories henceforth would be hollow, their glory pale reflections of the blaze that had passed. At night, the campfires burned lower. Men spoke in murmurs of home, of wives and children long unseen. They no longer dreamed of fame. They dreamed of survival. Some said they saw a figure by the shore when the moon was full, a man in gleaming armor, standing with his face turned toward Troy. No tracks marked the sand where he stood. The sentries would cross themselves and look away, for they knew no living man shone like that. Inside Troy's walls, grief took another shape. Priam still sat upon his throne, though his back was bent and his eyes hollow. The death of Achilles had brought him no joy, only the bitter symmetry of loss. His son was avenged, but the world had not grown kinder. Each victory now felt like the shadow of another tragedy waiting to unfold. The seers whispered that the gods were not done with Troy, that the end still waited, cunning and unseen, beyond the horizon of mortal plans. In the quiet between battles, the air seemed to hold a strange tension, as if the fates themselves were drawing breath. The soldiers on both sides felt it in their bones, that eerie stillness before a final storm. On the 10th night after the hero's funeral, Odysseus sat beside the fire with Diomedes and Nestor. The old man's voice was low, weaving through the crackle of the flames. "We have won nothing that time will not undo," he said. "The gods play their games, and men pay the price. We must end this war before it ends us all." Odysseus looked into the fire and said nothing for a long time. His mind, ever sharp, was already turning toward possibility, toward a new kind of weapon, not of bronze or blood, but of cunning, of patience, of deceit shaped into salvation. The idea would come to him fully in days yet to come, but its seed was planted here, in the silence left behind by wrath. The Myrmidons still guarded the tomb. Each night they lit a single lamp atop the mound, and from the sea the faint glow could be seen for miles. A beacon for sailors, a warning for enemies, and perhaps a comfort for the soul of the man who had burned too brightly to fade. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, the flame bent toward Troy. Men said it was Achilles himself watching, not in anger, but in curiosity, as though he too waited to see how the story would end. In the sky, the stars wheeled slow and patient. Time began to move again, dragging men and gods alike toward their destined reckoning. And in the shadow of Achilles' tomb, the world quietly changed. The age of heroes had begun to end, not with thunder, but with a whisper. The war would go on, but the songs would never again sound the same. Where once men sang of glory, they would now sing of loss of love, and of the brief, burning light that had taught them both. The war had stretched into its 10th weary year. What began in fire and fury had become a ritual of exhaustion. Each donned the same dust, the same cries, the same ache of men who no longer remembered why they fought. Troy still stood, proud and defiant, her walls gleaming under the sun like the skin of an immortal. The Greeks had gained ground, lost it, and gained it again, as though the gods themselves enjoyed watching mortals chase shadows. But the fire that once burned in the heart of the Achaean host had gone cold with Achilles' passing. Without his terrible strength, the army was a body without a heartbeat. And so the cunning of one man stepped into the void where wrath had ruled. Odysseus, son of Laertes, lord of Ithaca, a man whose weapon was not the sword, but the mind. He sat by his tent one sleepless night, the moon bright upon his face, the sea murmuring softly nearby. Around him lay the weary silence of an army at the edge of surrender. Yet in that stillness, his thoughts moved with the precision of a craftsman's hand. If Troy could not be taken by strength, then it must be taken by illusion. The next morning, he went to the Council of Kings. Agamemnon, grim and older now, presided with hollow eyes. Menelaus, his brother, still burned with quiet hatred for the wife he had lost. Nestor, the aged counselor, leaned upon his staff, weary as time itself. Odysseus spoke softly, yet every word landed with the weight of destiny. "We have fought for 10 years and gained nothing," he said. "The walls stand because we have fought like men, but Troy will fall when we begin to think like gods." The kings looked at him with puzzled silence, And then, with a faint smile, he spoke the idea that would end an age. We will leave. We will make the Trojans believe we have gone. And in our leaving, we will leave them a gift, a monument to their supposed victory. A horse, vast, magnificent, built of sacred wood, offered to Athena as a token of our surrender. At first, they laughed. Even Agamemnon's grim mouth twisted in disbelief. But Odysseus only looked toward the distant walls and whispered, "Men will die for glory, but cities fall for pride." It was then that the goddess herself, gray-eyed Athena, came unseen among them. Her shadow passed like wind through the tent, and her voice touched only Odysseus' ear. "Do it," she murmured. "Let cunning finish what wrath began." And the plan took shape. The carpenters set to work at once. Day and night they labored by the shore, their hammers echoing like muted thunder across the still sea. Slowly, the horse rose from the dust, a towering thing of cedar and pine, its flanks smooth and gleaming, its hollow belly large enough to hold 100 men. The head was noble, the mane carved like flowing fire, and upon its chest they carved words of false reverence. To Athena, from the Greeks, a gift for their safe return. Inside, hidden behind polished wood, the chosen warriors prepared: Odysseus, Menelaus, Diomedes, Neoptolemus the son of Achilles, and others whose names would one day fade into shadow. They carried no banners, no bronze that might clatter, only daggers, patience, and breath held like prayer. When the final night came, the Greeks burned their camp and sailed away into the mist, leaving the horse alone upon the beach. The fires crackled against the black horizon, their smoke curling like the closing pages of a story too long told. Only a single ship remained behind, hidden beyond the nearby island, waiting for the signal that would end the war. At dawn, the Trojans saw it, a gift, a miracle, a symbol that their long torment was over. They came cautiously at first, priests, soldiers, children, their eyes wide with disbelief. The beaches were empty, the ships gone. The wind carried only silence. Laocoon, the priest of Poseidon, cried out to them, "Beware the Greeks, even when they bear gifts." His voice cracked like prophecy, but the crowd had already begun to smile. They saw what they wanted to see, an end to pain, a promise of peace. When two great serpents rose from the sea and struck Laocoon and his sons dead before the city's gates, the Trojans mistook the omen. They believed the goddess Athena herself had punished him for blasphemy. So they dragged the horse within the walls, singing hymns of triumph. The sun fell, and the great city feasted. Wine flowed, torches burned, and amid their laughter, the horse stood silent, its wooden sides glinting faintly in the firelight, a god's face carved in deceit. As the last watchman drifted to sleep, a star fell over Troy. Its trail lingered, silver, ghostly, almost merciful. Inside the horse, Odysseus opened his eyes. He could hear the breathing of the men beside him, the heartbeat of fate beyond the walls, and the faint whisper of the sea, waiting to reclaim what men had built in defiance of time. He smiled in the darkness. "Now," he whispered, and the world began to end. Night held Troy in her gentle arms, wrapping the city in a calm so deep that even the gods paused to listen. The feasting had ended. The laughter was gone. Only embers glowed faintly in the courtyards, and the sound of distant waves lapped at the shore, the steady heartbeat of an indifferent world. Within the walls, the great horse stood silent in the square, its carved eyes glimmering faintly in moonlight. The streets around it were littered with garlands and wine cups, the remnants of joy left by those who had celebrated too soon. Somewhere, a lyre string broke in the night, a sound like fate snapping. Inside the horse, men waited. The air was thick and close, smelling of sweat, oil, and the salt of anticipation. No one spoke. They could hear the city breathing, the soft snore of guards, the quiet hum of life before the end. Odysseus counted each heartbeat as if it were a drumbeat to destiny. When the moon reached its highest point, he gave the signal. The trapdoor creaked open like a sigh. A rope slid down to the stones below. One by one, shadows descended, silent, careful, deadly. Odysseus last, his eyes burning with grim resolve. The air outside was cool and still. The city slept. From the walls came the answering signal. A single flame, far across the plain. The ships had returned. The Greek fleet, hidden behind the island of Tenedos, now moved swiftly through the dark, their sails pale as ghosts. Odysseus drew his knife and whispered, "Light them." The torches flared. The city that had stood for 1,000 years began to glow like dawn, not with the light of morning, but with the reflection of fire. They opened the gates. From the shadows beyond the walls came the thunder of returning feet, the clatter of bronze, the sharp cry of men who had not slept for vengeance. The Greeks poured into Troy like a tide that had waited too long. The streets filled with smoke and screaming. Temples cracked. Marble faces of gods blackened in the heat. The air turned thick with the scent of cedar and flesh. Through it all, the horse stood unmoved, its wooden flanks gleaming in infernal light, a monument to the brilliance and cruelty of man. King Priam, old and broken, took refuge by the altar of Zeus, clutching the cold marble as if it could save him. But even the gods were silent that night. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, found him there, a boy's youth wrapped in his father's fury. The blade that struck the king down did so without hatred, only the weary fulfillment of a story that had gone too far. In another hall, Queen Hecuba gathered the women of Troy. Her voice did not wail. It whispered, "Do not weep. The stars will remember." And when the fires reached the palace roof, she stood tall in the red light, the last queen of a dying world. Cassandra, the cursed prophetess, walked through the chaos with eyes that saw too much. She touched the walls as they burned and whispered, "It was always meant to be." And the stones cracked beneath her hand. High above the plain, the gods watched in uneasy silence. Athena, whose name had been carved upon the horse, turned her gaze away. Apollo's bow lay unstrung. Zeus himself spoke no word. Even immortality seemed small against the ruin of a single city. By dawn, Troy was ash. The sea breeze carried the smoke across the waves, where it mingled with the salt air and vanished. The Greeks wandered the ruins in silence, men who had won the world, yet lost something of their souls in doing so. Odysseus stood among them, his eyes fixed upon the blackened horizon. Behind him, the flames devoured what glory could not save. 10 years, he murmured. 10 years to learn what it means to be human. He turned toward the ships, knowing that his own journey, long, strange, and sorrowful, was only beginning. And somewhere beyond sight, in the halls of the dead, Achilles and Hector stood side by side, watching the smoke rise from the city that had shaped them both. They said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The sun climbed slowly over the ruins, turning ashes to gold for a fleeting moment before the wind scattered them to the sea. And as the light touched the horizon, a nightingale began to sing, a fragile voice among the bones of empires, a reminder that even after the greatest fire, the world dreams again. So ended Troy. So ended the age of heroes. But the story, whispered by poets, carried by stars, remembered by the sea, never truly died. For as long as men love and rage and grieve, the song of wrath and mercy, of pride and forgiveness, will echo still beneath the vault of heaven. The fire faded, the stars returned, and the sea, eternal, forgiving, rolled softly against the shore where once the ships had waited, singing to the ashes, "Sleep now. The war is over.